Hi everyone. So before starting this session on blind spots in economics, I wanted to ask you all a series of 3 questions. The first is, have you ever fallen short of the targets that you set for yourself? Or have you ever spent way too much time on one particular question in an exam? Or maybe have you just felt very overwhelmed while trying to decide what career path you should take? Now, I'm hoping that the answer to at least one of them is yes, because if so, behavioral economics might probably be able to help you. Now, traditional economics assumes that human behavior is rational. Now, what this means is that as human beings, we all know what we want. We can efficiently process all the information available to us about our choices, and we end up choosing what we want. Now, in short, traditional economics kind of assumes that we're all like Sheldon Cooper. Now, we know for a fact that that's not quite true because sometimes we end up acting very irrationally, and that represents a blind spot in decision making, where we all think that we're rational, but we sometimes end up acting in ways which are irrational. And we're not only irrational, but as Dan Ariely, a famous psychologist, likes to call it, we are predictably irrational. So I thought I would use this time today to talk about some key concepts in behavioral economics, which represent a blind spot in decision making, and how being more cognizant of them, you can end up becoming a better student and end up and hopefully making decisions that are more optimal for yourself. The first is time inconsistent preferences. So this essentially means that human behavior or human choices are a function of at what point of time they're made. So, for example, while making the plan for Ritika 1 month from now, I I would have something very ambitious like I want to read 500 pages every week. I want to learn coding online. I want to volunteer at an NGO close to my house. But while making the plan for what I should do right now, it always ends up being a lot less ambitious and a lot less productive. And the reason behind this is that when you're planning for yourself in the future, all the costs and benefits are at a future point of time, um, and hence are kind of weighed equally. But when you're deciding for yourself right now, the benefits of doing all those productive and value adding things only come in the future. But the benefits of doing all the less productive and less um, valuable but definitely more enjoyable activities are accrue to you right now, and that dichotomy between when the benefits and costs actually arise causes you to make bad decisions for right now, but when you plan for the future you end up making uh, a fairly rational estimate. Now, so how can you solve this, or how can you minimize the impact that time inconsistent preferences have on your day-to-day life? So there are two ways that this can be done. One is through building in accountability. If if there is someone else that you're accountable to, and if deviating from your future plans causes you to look poorly in their eyes, you're more likely to follow through. So a real life example of this could be that if your plan is to study math for 2 hours every evening for the next month, to ensure that you do end up doing that, you may end up tying up with a study partner, and you're more likely to then follow through, because not following through will have an added cost of letting your friend down. The other way is to make it more difficult for your future self to deviate from your stated goal. Now, what this means is in practice, you can make it can be something as simple as if for example you find yourself getting very distracted with your phone, you can essentially switch your phone off, put it in another room, lock it in a cupboard, and study in a separate room. So every time the distraction every time the distraction arises, it's more difficult for you to then leave, I don't know, if leave your wherever you're studying to go and get your phone. uh, there are other ways this can be that this is done. So for instance, there are websites where you can publicly commit, where you end up committing a certain amount of money, and that gets tied into a goal. So say for instance your goal was to run a half marathon in the next 6 months. You end up pledging some amount of money to the website, where if you don't end up fulfilling your goal, the website simply ends up taking your money. So these are the two ways where you can kind of minimize the blind spot that time inconsistent preferences end up causing on our day-to-day decision making. The second concept that I wanted to talk to you all about was anchoring. And what anchoring means is it refers to decisions that are influenced by an arbitrary reference point or an anchor. So a simple way to understand this is to look at this experiment that was run by two economists, Tversky and Kahneman, where they took a bunch of students and divided them into two groups, and they were given 5 seconds to answer, or rather guess the answer to a simple mathematical problem, which was multiplying 1 times 2 all the way to 8. The only difference between group A and group B was that group A was given the problem in an ascending order, and group B was given the same problem in a descending order, so starting from 8, 7, 6 all the way to 1. And what they found was group B's mean estimate of what the answer should be was a lot higher than group A's. And the only difference was the order in which the numbers had been arranged. So essentially, group A, which saw the smaller numbers first, ended up guessing a smaller estimate. But group B, which had the same identical problem, but just the numbers were arranged so that the larger numbers 8, 7, 6 were first, ended up guessing a much higher estimate. So the real life application of this is often the benchmarks that we set for ourselves. We end up evaluating the colleges that we get into or the marks we get by the anchors or by the reference points that are available to us. So, for instance, when I was in school, everyone, it just so happened that in my close friend circle, everyone cared a lot about how well you did in exams. So when I went to university, I had that anchoring with me was so strong that it was very hard for me to disassociate being a good student from just having good marks. And that so the reference points that you end up sometimes unconsciously setting for yourself end up influencing the decisions that you make in the future, but also how you evaluate those decisions. The third and the last point that I wanted to talk to you all about was sunk cost fallacy. Now, sunk cost fallacy essentially means that you continue an activity solely because of the previously invested time, money, energy, resources. It is an activity where if you look at all the future costs and benefits, it's a clear answer that you shouldn't do something, but you only do it because you've already spent so much time doing it in the past that you can't accept the fact that would all go to waste. Now, a real life example for that is one that I'm hoping that you don't come across, but it happened to me, was in my 12th standard board exams. I had a 6-mark question on trigonometry, and I'm sure it's a calculation that many of you may have done in your heads, but it's 180-minute paper and 100 marks in total. So you should ideally not be spending more than 11 minutes on a 6-mark question. I had spent 30 minutes at this point, and I was nowhere close to the final answer. Um, in every rational sense, I should have at that point given up and continued on to another question. But it was just so hard for me to give up at that point, because in my mind, if I give up now, all the 30 minutes that I've spent on this question have gone to waste, which is obviously a very unwise strategy to do, but something that happens to a lot of us very often. So just being more cognizant that when you're deciding, you're only assessing decisions based on any future costs and benefits, as opposed to time already invested or money already invested, which you have no control over and you cannot influence. So why should you care about all of this? Um, the reason this is all important is because human beings like to think that we're very rational. We like to think that we behave in a very logical and systematic manner. But the reality is that our actions often don't tie up with what we don't tie up with the image that we hold about ourselves. And this dichotomy is what causes a blind spot and also causes an inefficiency in decision making. So, by simply being aware of these blind spots and how they impact us, we can hopefully minimize the adverse impact that they have on our day to day decision making. So, I hope that you found that useful in some way. Thank you very much.